He was a force of nature. Not just a singer, he was an event. Before him, the world felt black and white. Then he showed up, and everything turned to color. He moved in a way no one had seen. He sang in a voice that felt both dangerous and holy. It was a mix of everything that was real about America. It had the blues from Beale Street, it had the gospel from the churches he loved, it had the country music from the radio late at night. It was raw, it was honest. You have to understand what he represented. He was freedom, he was rebellion, in a pair of blue jeans. Parents saw him on television swiveling his hips, and they panicked. They thought he was the devil. They saw his sneer and heard his voice, and they knew he was there to steal their children. And they were right. He was. He was stealing them away from a gray, predictable world. He was showing them something new. Something alive. His first recordings were lightning in a bottle. They were made in a tiny studio in Memphis. Just a man, a guitar, a bass, and a dream. There was no grand plan. There was just feeling. The songs were full of echo and energy. They sounded like they were recorded in a back alley at midnight. They were full of longing and swagger. Well, he wasn't just singing the words, he was living them. He wasn't a product, he was an artist. He took risks. He sang a blues song written for a woman and made it his own. He took a country waltz and turned it into a rock and roll anthem. Nothing was off limits. Nothing was safe. And that's what made it so exciting. He was real. The fame that followed was unlike anything before. It was a tidal wave. He became the most famous person in the world. He made movies. He sold millions of records. He was on every magazine cover. But through it all, he kept that edge. The music still had that fire. Jailhouse Rock, Hound Dog. These weren't nice songs. They were tough. They were defiant. He was still the kid from Tupelo, sneering at the world that tried to hold him down. He was the king, and he had earned the crown by being himself. Then, everything stopped. Uncle Sam came calling. In 1958, at the absolute peak of his fame, he was drafted into the United States Army. It was a huge news story. The world's biggest rebel was going to get his hair cut and wear a uniform. Many thought it would be the end of his career. Rock and roll moves fast. 2 years is a lifetime. New stars would come up, people would forget, but his manager, a shrewd man named Colonel Tom Parker, saw it differently. Parker was a master marketer. He saw the Army not as a career killer, but as a career maker. This was a chance to change the narrative. The dangerous rebel who scared parents could be transformed. He could become the all-American boy, the patriot who served his country. He could go in as a menace and come out as a hero. It was the greatest public relations move in history. So Elvis went. He got his hair cut in front of the world's cameras. He put on the uniform. He went to Germany, and while he was there, the single most devastating thing in his life happened. His mother, Gladys, died. He was completely broken. She was his anchor. His whole world revolved around her. He flew home for the funeral, a broken man in a soldier's uniform. He was lost. He was vulnerable. When he returned to Germany, he was a different person. A part of that fire had gone out. He was more willing to listen, more willing to be guided. He was lonely and adrift. The colonel's control over him tightened. When he finally came home in 1960, America was ready to welcome back its hero. The plan had worked perfectly. He was no longer a threat. He was a good son, a good soldier. The colonel booked a television special to reintroduce him to the world. But it wasn't a rock and roll show. It was a special with Frank Sinatra. Elvis wore a tuxedo. He looked clean-cut. He sang his old hits, but they felt tamer. He did a duet with Sinatra. It was a symbolic moment. The old guard was welcoming the new guard into the establishment. The rebel was being domesticated. This was the beginning of a new chapter. The colonel's new plan was simple. Forget the grueling tours, forget the risky raw music. The future was in Hollywood. Movies were the perfect machine. You make a movie, you release a soundtrack album, you sell movie tickets, and you sell records. It's a closed loop, it's safe. It's predictable, and it makes a lot of money. The goal was no longer to create art. The goal was to create product for the widest possible audience. Families, grandparents, little kids, everyone. His first movie after the Army was called G.I. Blues. It was a perfect piece of marketing. It was a light, fluffy musical comedy that cashed in on his recent Army experience. He played a soldier in Germany who sings in a band. It was art imitating life, but a sanitized Hollywood version of that life. It was a world away from the grit of his early films like King Creole. This was a postcard, not a painting. And the music had to serve the movie. This was a crucial change. Before, the music came first. The song was the reason. Now, the song was an accessory to the plot. The songs had to be simple. They had to be upbeat. They had to fit a scene where he was, say, singing to a baby or driving a Jeep. The soul-bearing honesty of his early work wasn't needed here. What was needed were jingles. catchy tunes. During the recording sessions for the soundtrack, there was one song in particular. It was based on an old German folk song. The melody was incredibly simple, almost like a nursery rhyme. It had an pa rhythm. It featured an accordion. This was the instrument of polka, of old European folk tunes. It was the opposite of a wailing saxophone or an electric guitar. It was safe. It was quaint. It was everything rock and roll was not. Elvis hated it. He thought it was a joke. He was the man who sang Heartbreak Hotel, a song drenched in loneliness and despair. He was the man who channeled pure, raw sexuality in Baby, Let's Play House. Now they wanted him to sing this little ditty. It felt silly. It felt childish. He was a bluesman at heart. His heroes were Arthur Crudup and B.B. King. What would they think of him singing this? He argued with the producers. He didn't want to do it, but the pressure was immense. This was the new direction. This was the Colonel's plan. This was what the studio wanted. He was no longer just an artist in a studio. He was the star of a multi-million-dollar production. He was a business, and the business needed this song for the movie. It was for a scene with a puppet show. A puppet show. The symbolism was not lost on him. So he did it. He sang the song. He gave them what they wanted, and in that moment he felt a part of himself die. It was the precise moment he crossed a line. He knew he was compromising. He knew he was giving up a piece of his artistic soul for a paycheck. It wasn't about the money for him, not really. He had more money than he could ever spend. It was about his identity. Who was he? Was he the trailblazing artist who changed the world? Or was he now just an employee, a hired hand, singing whatever was put in front of him? This song was the answer, and the answer terrified him. It was a sellout. There is no other word for it. It was the deliberate abandonment of artistic integrity for commercial appeal. It was a calculated move to be as inoffensive and as broadly popular as possible. And it was a betrayal of the very thing that made him special in the first place, his authenticity. The thing that made it so much worse was that it worked. It worked better than anyone could have imagined. The movie G.I. Blues was a massive box office hit. The soundtrack album was #1 for weeks. And that little song he hated, it became a gigantic hit all over the world. It sold millions of copies. It was exactly the kind of safe, family-friendly song that parents could buy for their kids. The Colonel had been proven right. This was the formula for success, and so the formula was repeated again and again and again. For most of the 1960s, Elvis was trapped in a gilded cage of his own making. He made movie after movie. Blue Hawaii, Girls, 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 Bad Fun in Acapulco. They were all basically the same movie. He was a handsome guy in an exotic location, surrounded by pretty girls, and he'd sing a handful of forgettable songs. The soundtracks were filled with tunes about clam bakes, yoga, and rocking chairs. The quality of the music plummeted. These weren't songs from the heart, they were contractual obligations. He grew to despise it. He would show up to the recording sessions listless and bored. He'd do his part in as few takes as possible and leave. He knew the material was junk. He complained to his friends. He felt like a joke. While the world of music was exploding around him, he was stuck. The Beatles arrived and changed everything. Bob Dylan was writing poetry, the Rolling Stones were bringing back the dangerous blues. Motown was creating a new sound. All this incredible, vital music was happening, and Elvis Presley, the man who started it all, was in Hollywood singing a duet with a dog or flying a helicopter. He had become irrelevant. He was a parody of himself. The man who once defined rebellion was now the face of the safe, predictable establishment. And it all started with that one song. That simple accordion-driven folk tune was the canary in the coal mine. It was the proof of concept for his own creative destruction. It showed the powers that be that you could strip away the soul, remove the danger, and still make a fortune. In fact, you could make an even bigger fortune. He felt like a sellout because he was one. He had traded his artistic crown for a Hollywood paycheck. He had allowed his manager and the studios to turn him from a cultural force into a brand. He knew it. He felt it in his bones every time he had to sing another silly song for another silly movie. It ate away at him. He was rich, he was famous, and he was miserable. He was creatively bankrupt. It took him nearly a decade to escape. In 1968, he finally put his foot down. He was offered another television special. The Colonel wanted it to be a cozy Christmas show with Elvis in a sweater singing carols. More of the same safe, family-friendly fare. But Elvis, with the encouragement of a visionary director, said no. He knew this was his last chance to remind the world and himself who he really was. He walked out on that stage not in a tuxedo or a goofy movie costume, but in a suit of black leather, head to toe. He looked dangerous again. He looked lean and hungry. He sat in a circle with his old bandmates, and they just played. They played the blues. It played raw, powerful rock and roll. The fire was back in his eyes. The sneer was back on his lip. In that 1 hour of television, he systematically destroyed the image that had been carefully built around him for the past 8 years. He was reclaiming his soul. He was washing away the sins of the movie years. It was a resurrection. The comeback special was a direct, powerful, and intentional rejection of everything that song from G.I. Blues represented. It was him telling the world, that wasn't me. This is me. The man with the guitar, singing from the gut. This is who I've always been. He never had to sing a song like that again. He went back to touring, playing to sold-out arenas, singing songs with passion and meaning. He was the king again, but the memory of that compromise never left him. It was a reminder of a time when he lost control of his own art, of his own identity. He felt like a sellout for recording that hit because it was the first time he consciously chose commerce over art, safety over danger, and obedience over his own instincts. It was the first link in a long chain that shackled him for years. The song that made Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, feel like a puppet on a string was Wooden Heart.